In this lesson, we're going to take a look at the executive branch of the federal government. The executive branch is the president and the vice president. And of course, the building here is the White House, where the president both lives during his term of office and works. All of the powers of the president are listed and explained in Article 2 of the Constitution. As we see here, his primary responsibility is to enforce the laws. Having said that, the president has quite a number of different jobs to do, as we'll see in a moment. There are three qualifications to be president, and they're listed here. First, you have to be 35 years old, or I should say at least 35 years old, and you have to be born in the United States. This is the only position for which you have to be a native-born citizen. You also have to be a resident for at least 14 years. That sounds like it conflicts with what we just saw in terms of being a native-born citizen, but it doesn't necessarily. For example, my sister lived out of the country on business for 5 years. She was a resident of another country. She would have to come back and reside here for 14 years before she could run for president, in theory. We also see here that the president's term is 4 years, and it's renewable only once. All right, so we have term limits for the president, and that is thanks to the 22nd Amendment, which was added to the Constitution in 1951. There are 7 roles or different hats that the president wears as president, so let's take a look at what they are. The first one we've already begun to discuss, and in the president's role as chief executive, his job is to enforce the laws. All right? Now, he doesn't do this alone. He has millions of federal employees that help him enforce the laws. These employees are organized into various federal agencies that are inside 15 executive departments. The picture that we see here is the president meeting with the heads of these executive departments, known collectively as his cabinet. All right, the person to the left in the photo, front left, is the Attorney General. Right, and then there are other cabinet secretaries. Is the title we give these individuals. Makes them sound like they're note takers to someone else, but Secretary of Labor, Secretary of Agriculture, Secretary of the Treasury, these people are actually in charge of those named departments and the thousands or millions of federal employees that work inside those departments. Together here, though, they help advise the president. The president is also commander-in-chief. He is in charge of the armed forces. He tells them where to go, and they go. So we have a civilian head of the military in this country. The generals take their orders ultimately from the president. Now, the president does not make laws. All right, Congress makes laws. However, anybody can suggest new laws, and the president has many ideas for new laws. So he simply gets members of his party that are in the House and the Senate to introduce bills into those houses. Additionally, as we see in the photo here, once a year in January in the evening, televised nationally, the president gives the annual State of the Union address, telling members of Congress and the Supreme Court, and of course the nation, because many of us are watching, where he would like to go legislatively in the coming year. The president, let me back up a second. We do not have a head of this country. We've got 3 co-equal branches of government. However, there are times when we need to put a face to the nation, and we give that job to the president. And in that role, he is acting as chief of state. And in that role, you can see he does a couple of different things. One is to meet with foreign leaders that come to Washington. And additionally, it's to do some annual ceremonies What we see here, the president does have the power to pardon individuals, which is to sort of a get out of jail free card, if you will. And we see him here pardoning a turkey ahead of a few days before Thanksgiving, and that turkey now will not end up on anybody's plate for dinner. It will go off to live in a farm, live out the years, the rest of its life. Does seem a bit silly, but is one of the many traditions that the president does. Others might include the Christmas tree lighting ceremony on the White House lawn, and the Easter egg hunt also on the White House lawn in the springtime. Presidents like to shine in foreign policy because it really is their domain. They've got the State Department at their disposal. They get to choose how they want to shape the relationship with foreign countries. And in that role, the president acts as chief diplomat. Here we see him talking to the gentleman in the middle is the former president of Afghanistan, where during President Obama's presidency, we had military troops there. So he's conducting foreign policy. The president is the head of his political party. And what we see here is that he goes out and campaigns to help members of his party in various races. There's Senate races and congressional races, gubernatorial races. So the president will go out as during the election season and help campaign to get other Democrats elected. Additionally, in his role as party leader, he will also hold a number of fundraisers, those expensive $25,000 per plate dinners. He'll fly into New York City and Los Angeles and other wealthy areas and meet with a few people as they put up big money to be donated, again, not into his pocket, into the campaign committee bank accounts, and that money is then used to assist other party members to buy for their campaigns. So the money is then spent on other people running in the same political party, for television commercials and things of that like. The president is also, as we see here, chief guardian of the economy, which is interesting because Americans tend to quickly reelect when times are good economically and unemployment is low. The president gets a lot of the credit for that, and if he's running for re-election, gets fairly easily reelected. The opposite is also true when economic times are not good. The president often is bumped out, and his challenger is elected instead when unemployment is high. The reason I said this is kind of interesting is that the president doesn't have that much control over the economy. We live in a free market capitalist economy where individuals own businesses. The government does not own businesses. Having said that, the government and the president in particular, along with Congress, can tinker around the edges of the economy. They can raise taxes, they can lower taxes, they can increase regulations rules that businesses have to follow. Some of those rules can be expensive to comply with, or again, they can decrease regulations. But they do not have direct control over the economy. So those were the different jobs that the president has. Let's take a look at how the president gets elected. Presidential election is different than any other election that you're familiar with. Typical election, you've got candidates running, people go and vote, there's a winner, there's a loser, the winner gets elected. Presidential election has this extra step called the Electoral College, and here we've got 538 votes, as we see in the bottom of the screen here that directly elect the president. How this works is that each state has a number of electoral college votes equal to the number of representatives that state has in the House of Representatives plus its 2 senators. So there are 435 members of the House. There are 100 senators. That total, of course, is 535, and 3 more for Washington, D.C., the people that live in D.C. That's 538. This means, of course, that states with larger populations have more electors, as we see on the map. So that's why presidents often campaign in the areas in the states that have larger numbers of electors, particularly in states where you've got a fairly equal number of registered Republicans and registered Democrats. But I digress. Let's move on. Here we see a vote total map from the 2008 election, and we can see that President Obama got 364 electoral votes, and John McCain and Sarah Palin, who ran against him in 2008 as the Republican candidates, got 174 electoral votes. That's outlined in the map. Obama's votes, the states that Obama won are in blue, and the states that McCain won are in red. Now, notice I said the states that they won. Again, we're looking at a presidential election as 51 separate elections. So we all go and vote on election day. And when the polls close in a particular state, the votes get counted. The winner of the popular vote in that state gets all of that state's electoral votes. So this is what we call a winner-take-all system. And in order to become president, you need 270 electoral votes. That's one more than half. Half of 538 is 269. So a candidate needs 270, and only one candidate can get to 270. All right, so when we're watching the returns on election night, as they begin to come in, we see on the behind the announcer on the map, a state goes red if the Republican candidate won that state's electoral votes. It goes blue if the Democratic candidate won that state's electoral votes, and the candidate that gets to 270, or obviously above 270, becomes president. And that's what we see here from the map in 2008. As you may have guessed, this is not a perfect system, and it's not without criticism. Of course, this system is laid out in the Constitution, so the only way to change it is to add an amendment to the Constitution. But do be aware that 4 times in our nation's history, the popular vote winner, the nationwide popular vote winner, has not become president. Now, there really is no such thing as a nationwide popular vote winner in a presidential election, because I just said we're really looking at 51 separate votes. But if we were to add up all the votes in all the different states in Washington, D.C. that the candidates got, we could talk about a nationwide popular vote. And the last time this happened was in the election of 2000, when 49 states and Washington, D.C. had totaled their votes. Neither George W. Bush nor Al Gore had the magic number of 270. The state of Florida had not reported yet, and that's because the vote was incredibly close. That led to a big mess. It took several weeks after the election and the Supreme Court of the United States to intervene. Ultimately, it was decided that George Bush had won the election by less than 650 votes in the state of Florida, but that was enough because it's winner take all. President Bush got all of Florida's 25 electoral votes, which put him over 270, and he became president. That was in the year 2000. Having said that, Al Gore had about 1 million more popular votes than President Bush did in that election. So this is an example of winning the Electoral College vote, but losing the nationwide popular vote. So then, quick summary. Three requirements to become president: you have to be over 35, you have to be a native-born citizen, and a resident for 14 years. The 7 different jobs the president has include chief executive, enforcing the laws; commander-in-chief, in charge of the military; chief lawmaker, proposing laws; chief of state, that sort of ceremonial leader that we talked about; party leader; guardian of the economy; and one that I forgot to list here was chief diplomat in handling foreign policy. And lastly, it is the Electoral College that officially chooses the president.